We're live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Capitalist Corner. I am Mark Pellegrino, chairman of the Capitalist Party, and my co-host with me today is Michael Liebowitz, co-chairman of the Capitalist Party and the host of The Rational Egoist. Michael, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very happy to be doing this with you. I'm happy to be here today, and I'll be happy to be here every day during the
Me,
week, not
me,
weekends.
yeah, but not weekends. We do need weekends off. Yeah,
Yes.
so I appreciate your presence here as well. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of things in the news. The FCC appears to be launching a investigation against Disney's DEI hiring practices. And Michael, this chafes me as a capitalist. This really bothers me. I think we should talk a little bit about what the FCC is all about. The Federal Communications Commission was created by Franklin Roosevelt. I don't know how many of you folks out there know that. And it was ostensibly created to, of course, make content better on the airwaves. But really, its purpose was to further the New Deal and to knock out competition and to prevent anybody who was against the propagation of the New Deal from actually saying what they felt about it. So they would withhold licenses to anti-New Deal people. They would penalize them in all kinds of ways. It's a censorship board, which is of course anti-First Amendment. So it's been around for a long time, and we've tolerated it, I think, long enough. Now this DEI thing, though, this diversity, equity, and inclusion thing, it's a major thorn in the side of the right. Justifiably so. I think it's a terrible standard for anything. It's a racialized standard for hiring people. But I mean, should the FCC really be going after Disney, a private company, for actually choosing to use these standards for hiring people? Yay or nay?
Definitely not. And for the same reason I'm opposed to affirmative action, I'm opposed to this. Uh, Private people and private companies should be able to conduct themselves how they wish as long as they're not violating anybody's rights. And if they view it as best for their bottom line or for whatever reason they want, that they're going to institute these policies, however asinine I might think they are, that's their right. And I don't want the government telling people they can't engage in these types of policies any more than I want the government telling them that they have to. I mean, I don't want the government stepping in to tell us, well, Liebowitz, I see that you have Carpenter's Hall in your virtual background, and we don't approve of that any longer, so you have to get rid of it. That's my choice. That's what I want to do, and it's not the government's business. So somebody here in the text, in the comment section, asks, isn't DEI violative of individual rights? No, it's absolutely not. No more so than if I don't want to let a person into my home, does it violate that person's rights? If I run a company, I can hire whom I want for whatever reasons I want. I happen to be Jewish with hazel eyes. If somebody says, look, I'm not hiring Jews with hazel eyes, that's their right. Dumb? Yeah. But it doesn't violate my rights because I do not have a right to that job. Nobody does.
Well, you're also not using force against the person. The person has the choice to go somewhere else.
Right.
There's no compulsion involved in that at all. But you do get people reacting to you in this way, as I do all the time. Well, what would you must agree with all white only bathrooms. I said, I personally do not agree with white only bathrooms. I think it's an insidious policy. I think legal segregation, is an insidious policy. But if it's a private restaurant that chooses to have white only bathrooms or practice this kind of ridiculous segregation, that's their business. And I hate to tell you, it's such a poor business model. I think the market would choose very wisely and probably put that business out of business in short order. And we saw that, even during Jim Crow. Capitalism wanted integration. It wanted to press forward and integrate because that's what capitalism is. The market naturally tends towards that kind of integration, and it was the legal and cultural system that prevented people from, naturally integrating with one another. Um, but yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, we have a question here from the wonderful James Valiant. He says private discrimination was made unlawful by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. What thinkest thou thereof? What thinkest I, Jim, is that the Republicans who voted for it overwhelmingly and the Democratic president who signed it into law were dead wrong, both morally and constitutionally. I think there's nothing in the federal constitution that grants the federal government that type of authority. I think that the Ninth Amendment, which allows people to have whatever liberties, that in the 14th Amendment, which makes that incumbent on the states, would rule out the federal government passing that type of law. So I'm totally against that law for both moral and constitutional reasons. And Mark, you kind of alluded to this, is that the market has a way of weeding these things out. If a company is hiring people on things less than merit or, other criteria, that company is going to tend to not put forward the best product. People aren't going to buy that product and it will be weeded out. When the government steps in and starts forcing people, all bets are off. The market mechanisms are screwed with and no longer work properly.
Yeah, and look, the purpose of the government is to protect individual rights, and one of your rights is the right to discriminate. Discrimination simply means, having preferences. You have a right to private preferences, and they could be illogical and irrational. And so long as you're not using force against another person, those private preferences won't harm you. They don't violate your rights. It may bother you that somebody has those kinds of standards, and justifiably so, but they're not violating your rights. Now, where do you think we went wrong here? What happened in America that makes this simple concept so difficult for them to understand? Where they actually think that if you say something bad about, if you don't believe their ideology, you're actually hurting them, you're causing physical harm, and you are in violation of their rights.
Wow, that's a tough question. Where do I think we went wrong? Well, I think first of all, the idea that you should be free to do only what the government deems is correct is out. Let's get rid of that. Now, I just did an interview prior to coming on here on the 250th anniversary of Patrick Henry's "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech. And we ended up talking about the Constitution and the failure of the Constitution to keep the government within its bounds. And we talked about the anti-federalists. They critique the necessary and proper clause, the commerce clause. And I've long thought that these, basically allowed for the type of incursions that we have. But my guest pointed out, and absolutely correctly in my view, it ultimately doesn't matter what you have on paper. If the people in a country want to do away with their freedom, they're going to. And, it could be caused by fear, whether of a foreign enemy or an internal threat. The immigrants are going to get us, or whatever. Iran's getting ready to bomb us at any day. Now, sometimes these threats might be real, but many times they're fabricated and exaggerated, right? You're going to end up in poverty if the government doesn't intervene in the economy. The morals of the country are going to go to hell if the government doesn't regulate them. And slowly but surely, it's like the proverbial frog in boiling water. Your freedoms go away. You sell it off bit by bit. So I don't know where the start is to this. It probably was baked in from the beginning. A lot of it just has to do with what human beings ultimately want. Liberty requires vigilance. It requires an understanding of what it means, why it's correct, why it works, what we have to do to keep it. That takes a lot of work. And I just think a lot of people aren't willing to put it forward. And hopefully this show will help bring people over to the idea of liberty, real individual rights based capitalist liberty.
It also takes courage. Liberty takes courage because you're not sure of outcomes, and a lot of government today attempts to assure outcomes, which they can only do by force. I sort of agree with you. I think that the source was baked into the paradoxes in the Constitution that need to be weeded out, and I think a capitalist party would attempt to amend the Constitution in such a way as to take those paradoxes out. That would be a very difficult legal task for legal philosophers to handle, not necessarily for folks like us. But I also think that Roosevelt's second Bill of Rights contributed a great deal to what Rand would call the inflation of rights, so that people lost sight of the fact that rights were a claim, but they could be a claim to stuff if you've earned it, but they're a claim to freedom from violence, to freedom from force. They're a claim to action, freedom of action, uncoerced action. So it went from just that general human concept that a rational being should be free to act in his own rational self-interest, implied, of course, in that concept of rights, to you have a right to be free from want. You have a right to a home. You have a right to an income. You have a right to a job. None of which you have a right to, but this now has become an embedded part of our culture, and the government has simply gone along with. Even if they ceded it, it's now become a rather fruitful aspect of our belief system, and very, very much embedded. So much embedded that when the Republican opposition comes into office claiming that they're going to do away with big government, they refuse to touch the very entitlements that will actually do away with big government.
Yeah, I have it right in front of me here in my copy of Virtuous Selfishness. The essay, if anybody's interested, I believe it's available online. Ayn Rand's essay, Man's Rights, actually includes Franklin Roosevelt's new Bill of Rights.
Which incidentally, I think informs the UN's Declaration of Rights. From Article 22 onward, it is a declaration of claims to stuff that any human being should have. And from that point on goes south. So it's embedded across cultures now that rights are claims to stuff. And that imposition of a moral obligation for you to provide that stuff is just natural. You should just understand that it's so. It's the way, it's the contract, it's a social contract.
So speaking of overreach on the part of government, while preparing for the show, you mentioned an article that you had read about the Donald.
Yes.
And the Donald saying that perhaps he could run for a third term. What do you think about that? Why did that get your ire? Why did that get your ire up?
First of all, I think that anybody who desires to run for president has something wrong with them. And it should be an immediate disqualifier, unless, of course, their desire is based upon the desire to completely dismantle what we see as the state today and then to go away. But that's not a happy thing to engage in. It's not something that someone would generally gravitate to. I think the appropriate response to somebody who is being asked to be the president of the United States is, I do not want the job, but I will, if elected, fulfill my fiduciary responsibility to the people of the United States, protect the Constitution of the United States and individual rights. Milton Friedman was asked the question that Donald Trump was asked. When Donald Trump was asked, if you were dictator for a day, what would you do? And he went on a litany. He said, here's what I'd do if I were dictator. He took that question very seriously. Unfortunately, Friedman had a very different response. When Friedman was asked the same question, he said, I wouldn't be dictator. And so the interviewer had to go on and say, okay, let's just talk about the programs you get rid of. So that's a very different mindset. And Donald suggesting that he would violate the Constitution of the United States and go for a third term by a reach around, a sneaky reach around. The sneaky reach around is this. They proposed J.D. Walsh as president of the United States and him as vice president of the United States.
Vance, right? J.D. Vance.
Yeah, not Walsh. Walsh is the guy from Minnesota. So J.D. Vance is the president of the United States. Donald Trump is vice president. When Vance gets into the presidency, he resigns, allows Trump to come into the presidency, and that's how they circumvent the Constitution of the United States. That's scary. The fact that he is entertaining this should frighten everybody, even Republicans. If they weren't so busy spiking the football in the end zone, they might see that this is a very malignant personality trait that is a potential danger to the American people. What say you? And you think there are some constitutional breaks to this that would prevent him from being able to do this? Tell us about those.
Well, first, I just want to comment that I'm seeing a lot of people like they're saying, "Oh, come on, this is just Donald. He's trolling the media," and they seem to love it. To me, even if you're just trolling the media, is that really what we want in a president? That he's spending his time bullshitting the media for kicks? Like it's very, very petty. I, however, don't think he's doing that. I think he's testing the waters. I think he doesn't care about constitutional limitations. I think he doesn't care about anything other than his own power and his own aggrandizement. Now, the problem with this idea that he's going to become vice president and then that'll be a segue to become president because Vance would step down is the 12th Amendment, which says that no person not eligible to be president can be vice president. So if you're not eligible to run for the presidency, you're not eligible to be vice president. So that's not the workaround that he thinks it is. But I'm with you. The very fact that this guy said that is so grotesque to me. And the Republicans, the so-called constitutional originalists that they claim to be, how they've gotten in line and sold their very souls to this guy, it's just mind-boggling. And I might have mentioned it yesterday, but it's worth repeating. The reason that I'm harder on Donald Trump than I am on the left, one of the reasons anyways, is because Trump does this stuff under the banner that he's a capitalist, that he's pro-Constitution. And in my view, people need to be disabused of that idea as quickly as possible. He's no capitalist. He's no constitutionalist. And for those of us who are pro-Constitution, who are pro-capitalism, we need to differentiate ourselves from this all too toxic brand. But you and I were talking earlier, Mark, and you were telling me about George Washington and what King George actually said about George Washington. What was that about?
Yeah, so at the time George Washington was president, there was no precedent, of course, to how long the president can serve, and there was a great deal of discussion about it. Some thought he should be a monarchical figure who could serve for life. And George Washington was such a popular figure, he did indeed have the power to serve for life if he wanted to. But he decided to step down after the second term, which became the precedent for presidents up until Roosevelt. Now, King George III, of course, his nemesis across the sea, wasn't a dumb guy. He recognized that if Washington actually did step down, he said he would be the greatest man alive, the greatest man alive. And I think that was true. Washington looked power in the face and with true Republican principles stepped down and let the power pass peacefully in an election to someone else. One of the first times in history that has ever happened. And we take for granted that we've had nearly 250 years of basically peaceful power transfers. That's unheard of in the history of the world. And that's thanks to people like true Republicans like Washington, who wanted the executive to be a limited power. I mean, at the time Washington was president, the power of the presidency was a fraction of what it is today. It was basically limited to the foreign affairs, and the legislature managed its affairs, and the states managed most of the business that needed to be taken care of. That's something that I think we could return to. I think. What say you?
Very nice. If we were to return,
if we were,
I don't want to say, huh?
Well, not local magistrates, not making the smaller states just as insidious as the federal government, but just leaving people.
Oh no, I thought you meant to return to a situation where the executive is very limited.
Yes.
That would mean that. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the things, when's the last time Congress actually declared war? World War II. But that didn't stop us from getting involved in Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Beirut, Iraq twice, Afghanistan. So we're clearly beyond the constitutional limits of what he's supposed to be doing. I mean the executive, whichever one it happens to be. So I do want to return to that. I want to return to a constitutional republic that's dedicated to individual rights. I'm not exceedingly optimistic that that's going to happen given where we are, but I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think it were possible. And there are people out there, some whom I disagree with an awful lot, and libertarians, for instance, I disagree with on a lot of issues. But there are a lot of them who want to return the country to a constitutional republic. So it can happen if we keep making these arguments, and hopefully we'll make some headway. And that I think is the best that we can hope for.
Yeah, but our big brained friends at the American Communist Party, a fraudulent party, by the way, claim that the bigger the society, the more responsibility these government officials need, the more centralized the power has to be. What say you to that?
What do I think about the American Communist Party?
No, no. That could be a separate discussion, but they act as if the large, sophisticated, industrialized society needs more centralized force as opposed to less. What do you say to that? I have my opinions about it. I'm sure they're very similar.
No, I think that industrialization happens when people are free to act. It happens better. The sort of network of relations amongst businesses and consumers is much better under freedom. The products that people want are available under freedom. I mean, if you just look at the USSR, when people, surpluses of things nobody wants, and yet people can't get bread, they're in bread lines. And a lot of that, if not all of it, has to do with Mises's critique of socialism, where he demonstrated very convincingly, I think irrefutably, that economic calculation can't take place under socialism because you don't have money, you don't have individuals making choices with their money. So the value judgments of individuals aren't reflected in prices, and therefore entrepreneurs have no gauge about what needs to be produced. So, I mean, as if it needs to be said, I think the communists are idiots. They're also very rude people, by the way, from our engagements with them.
Well, yeah, you're right. Mises talked about the calculation problem, and the larger and more sophisticated a society is, with hundreds of millions of people in it, there's no possible way the smartest bureaucrat in the world, or maybe even the best AI we have, could anticipate their choices. And Thomas Sowell addressed the same problem, but he called it the knowledge problem. That the smartest person in the world has a tiny, 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 tiny infinitesimal fraction of the knowledge of the whole of society. And when you leave society alone, prices, for example, are a perfect example of all of that knowledge coalescing in this price, unbeknownst to everybody else. All they have to do is look at that price, and it's a sum of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of choices being made that nobody could possibly anticipate. So it's actually the opposite, American Communist Fake Party. It's actually the opposite. The larger a society, the more sophisticated, the more advanced, the more modern, the less centralized control there needs to be. The more, economics becomes a micro issue. And I think all economics is a micro issue anyway, but it becomes a micro issue, and the government needs to stay away, and it can't, and does not have the capacity to judge for other people.
No, it certainly does not. And I think that a big problem for people like us who are trying to get our message out and make the case for a free society, and you're going to love this pivot, by the way, is the misinformation that is out there. And
Great pivot.
It's on all sides. We have massive amounts of information. And I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think it's the Volokh conspiracy, and Eugene Volokh, they're part of Reason Magazine. He wrote what I thought was a pretty good piece on misinformation. And let me just give some context to my own views on this subject. For decades, I've been hostile to the mainstream media for misinformation, for biased coverage, you name it. And he points out, that either they were willing accomplices or they were extremely neglectful, and the fact that Joe Biden just wasn't up to the task, right? He's obviously cognitively impaired, he's old, and they hit it, or they just didn't look deep enough. And he said, imagine if that were George W. Bush, how much effort they would be putting into figuring out what was going on. But it's true. I mean, they hid the Hunter laptop story, for instance. They didn't go, the whole 9 yards in reporting that, and then the Biden thing. So a lot of mainstream Americans have lost trust in the institution of the media. What do you think about that?
I think it's true, and I think it's led to a spate of conspiracy theories. It's led to a sort of social-wide neurosis. If you think about what the media is supposed to represent, the media is like our own functioning brain, our perceptual and reasoning system. It takes in information, and if it's not processing it properly or evading information, then the society reflects that in its own nature. So people are becoming neurotic, they're becoming distrustful, they can't trust the evidence of their own senses anymore, and they hatch all kinds of schemes to try to explain all of these terrible things that seem to be happening, because the media is not providing our senses with the proper information so that we could integrate that information and make rational sense of the world. So in a sense, our central nervous system, our brain, the organ responsible to society for giving us information so that we can act correctly, is malfunctioning. It's off. And whether or not the people did it, the individual reporters did it deliberately, I think there were those who did it deliberately because they have an agenda. I think I really think a lot of the folks in the media are animated by an ends justify the means philosophy, and their ends, they believe, are moral, and they're willing to achieve those ends irrespective of the means used to produce them. And if that means hiding the senility of the President of the United States so that he can pass the Green New Deal, or so that he can pass some other piece of legislation that will now be permanently embedded in our culture, so be it. That's what has to be done. Of course, the irony of all of this is that the Democratic Party screams the loudest about the subversion of democracy by President Trump, justifiably so, given some of the things he said. But
Sure.
they have been the ones who have actively undermined "quote unquote" democracy through not only misinformation, misinforming the voters so that they would vote for their guy, but also in the way they deposed him, disenfranchising the Democratic National Committee, basically disenfranchising the Democratic voters from any choice whatsoever. So the media it's our mental organ, and we need, I think, rules in place, not put in there by government, but we need a means of assuring that the media is going to give us the best possible information. Now, how do we do that in a free society? Because we have our public forum here, we have X, Facebook, all these mediums where everybody, in a sense, becomes a content creator, and everybody's putting their ideas out there, true or false, and they're propagating. They become news reporters, in a sense, or they pass on information from one news organ to another, whether it's true or false, and it becomes a part of our culture. How do we maintain our freedoms and still keep the press the pure conscience of the country that it needs to be?
Well, I think this is a very similar topic to when we were discussing the Constitution, that ultimately it's up to the people. If people don't want to do their due diligence in checking their sources, if they don't want to hold media companies accountable, then we're going to get what we get. And that's part of the risk with freedom, is it requires diligence, it requires intelligence, it requires courage, as you said earlier. And that points to me to one of the problems is rather than just being skeptical because of what the mainstream media has done and their bias, for as long as I can remember, people have turned to influencers, podcasters, in media outlets who seem to me nothing but grifters, right? Just because MSNBC and CNN are not reliable does not make Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk reliable, right?
Right.
When you've got Tucker Carlson who says evolution, nobody believes in it anymore, and he talks about how demons are visiting him in his sleep, when we know from his private exchanges what he said about Donald Trump, but what he says in public, and yet he still has millions and millions of viewers. It's a problem. When people believe everything Donald Trump says, and when you say, no, he's a liar, they scream at you that you have TDS. That's a problem. And this is a pattern, and it goes beyond just the conservative, or rather, I don't even like using conservative because William F. Buckley Jr. and Ronald Reagan, these people are not. You know what I mean? So, but it goes beyond the sort of Trumposphere, the Glenn Becks and Sean Hannitys of the world. And if you look at the libertarian podcasters, Clint Russell, he just promotes conspiracy after conspiracy without having to prove any of it. And he's got hundreds of thousands of followers. And, if people aren't going to put their critical mind at work, we're doomed. Now, hopefully a show like ours, where we're going to come on here, speak the truth, tell people the truth, make arguments, and if we get things wrong, which I'm sure we will, we of course will just say, oh, we were wrong. We won't double down on it. We won't say, no, we were right. Your eyes and ears are deceiving you. We never said that. You have to build trust, but it also depends on the people, because they have to be willing to do the work as well.
Yeah, that's the thing with establishments. Once they start becoming established, once they start getting a following and making a great deal of money from the crap that they're saying, it takes a man of extraordinary integrity to pull back and say, I was wrong about that. And they tend to double down. You've noticed that academics. Yes. Academics and pundits alike, once they paint themselves into a corner, they refuse to apologize and come out and say, I'm sorry, I actually got it wrong this time. But that would do much for me as a viewer of a podcaster or a pundit to see that, oh, their actual goal is to get at the truth. It's not to create controversy, to get clicks, to become popular, to make more money. It's actually to get at the truth. So, I mean, you're right. This is the danger of freedom. This is the danger of freedom that so many people want to avoid somehow by creating laws and restraints on liberty that they think will make us safer. No, liberty is a sort of dangerous place in the sense that you can't predict outcomes, but the beauty of this danger is it forces you to be a full moral agent, which frankly means you are sovereign. You have total control over your own life and choices, to the extent that one does have that. And that should not be daunting to you. It should give you joy that you are the captain of your own destiny. This is one of the most inspiring messages, I think, from Ayn Rand, and so terribly unpopular in so many ways today, that it blows my mind that people, especially artists, don't gravitate to this message, almost intuitively. You know what I mean?
Mark, you mentioned Ayn Rand, and of course, we're both objectivists. That fuels us, that shapes our views of everything going on. But just as an aside to what we're talking about, if you had to recommend two books that would help somebody get an understanding of capitalism and an understanding of freedom, what two books would you recommend? I have two in mind. That's why I just wanted to see. It came to me, so I asked.
From Rand?
No, not from Rand. From outside sources other than Rand.
Because I would say Rand immediately, because a lot of her stuff is so accessible to everybody. She writes in such a clear way.
Yes.
I mean, I would say Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and also The Virtue of Selfishness, which I think is the best moral justification for egoism, rational egoism out there. And the only thing that can really stand up against the altruism that I think is the foundation stone of collectivist statism. Let me see. For what would be your first two? I want to let me
I would
outside.
say the Frederick Bastiat's The Law and Economics in One Lesson by Henry
Yes,
Hazlitt. I
those are
think for
great.
somebody trying to, like, as a sort of an introduction to the ideas, that maybe they've read Rand, maybe they haven't, but other than Rand, I would recommend those two books. I think they're phenomenal in making the case for a free society and very accessible. They're not difficult reads at all.
Yeah, and best the fact that somebody who wrote at the time, Bastiat wrote that it's still accessible today to modern thinkers,
Yeah.
modern readers. That's a testament to him. Like Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine is one of the most accessible people to read. He wrote like a modern man in the
Yeah.
18th century. So you should read anything. You should read The Age of Reason. Everybody
Oh
should read.
God, yes.
Everyone should read the collected works of Thomas Paine. He was an absolutely brilliant, brilliant, brilliant mind. So I agree with those. I would also add a little bit of Thomas Sowell, even though Sowell is a Chicago school guy and probably a monetarist in some respects. He explains in Basic Economics, I think, the capitalist ideal fairly well, and I think it's extremely accessible. And I think it should be required reading for anybody who wants to be a citizen, for anybody who wants to vote, for anybody who wants to participate in the political process.
We
What,
can't have required
I
reading
know,
though
no,
in
I
a
know,
free
no, I know, I know
society.
this, but I'm saying it. I'm saying I think it should be, but that doesn't mean that I would pass a law saying you have to read Thomas Sowell before you vote. It would just be a strong recommendation, or I'll throw you in jail. I'm kidding. Yeah, Thomas Sowell is great, and also a great social commentarian as well. And I think one of the things that I love about him so much is that he takes a lot of the myths that have been perpetuated throughout our culture, basically by the left, and meticulously and logically dismantles them.
So back to current events. During the Biden administration, they went after Ticketmaster for being a monopoly. They claimed they were a monopoly. Now Donald Trump he signed an executive order limiting or completely eradicating resale of tickets. Basically, they want to do away with scalpers. What do you think about this? Should the president of the United States be involved in ticket sales for rock concerts?
No.
Okay, I'm going to need you to elaborate a little bit. I mean, I know it was a yes or no question, but I think it's kind of implied that you got to expand.
No. The government shouldn't be involved in any exchanges like that. Somebody can buy up a whole lot of tickets and then go out on the street and sell them, resell them for a price. He's not violating anybody's rights. He's not stealing anything. He's making deals with one party and then making deals with another party. Everybody is involved voluntarily in the transaction, so he's not doing anything wrong. If you're willing to pay triple the price of a seat to a baseball game from a scalper than you would probably get online,
Yes.
then that's you're saying I value the triple the price less than I value the game. I want to see the game more. So it's a win-win situation. That the government is trying to make a zero-sum game.
Yeah. The point is, if people refuse to pay the prices, then the scalpers would be put out of business. There'd be no reason to buy the tickets. The demand is such that people do it. That's on them. I remember I once had a debate with a correctional officer. He told me, it's a shame that he can't take his son to the Patriots game. It's so expensive. No, he actually took him. He said it's a shame. It cost him an arm and a leg to take his son to the Patriots game. And I told him, your behavior is the reason the tickets are so expensive because you're willing to pay it. And he would not wrap his mind around it. He just thought it was, evil that they were charging so much. But the fact that people put such a value on sports, I'm not paying that kind of money to go to a football game. I don't care. You know what
Right.
I mean? I'm not doing it.
Me neither.
The things in life that I value, I'll pay to see and I'll pay to do. And that's all there is to it, and it's not anybody else's fault, of course, unless the government is putting price hikes in there intentionally, or putting price supports to stop prices from falling. But other than that, if these things are the result of consensual activities, sorry, is that Frankie I hear? Is Frankie scurrying around?
He's confused and walking in little circles right now. I had him resting, but now he's up. I don't think he knows I'm here unless I'm directly touching him.
Oh, he thinks he's alone?
Yeah, but I'll get his attention.
You bring him over. You should show him. Frankie's a big draw. People everywhere love Frankie.
Of course, because he's so adorable.
He is an absolutely adorable dog. Very friendly, too. If not, he is confused, but still great.
My little buddy.
And how old is he, Mark?
18 and a half.
Wow.
So we're going to Atlanta, Georgia tomorrow. So we're traveling tomorrow, working the next day, and traveling back that night.
Oh, we've got a commentator here that says, in reaction to Frankie. Who can blame him? Yeah, I don't like the very idea, and there's this Trump and Kid Rock White House. It's just to me that people feel that, especially this way, like, what authority does the President of the United States have under executive power to sign executive orders to screw around with ticket sales, right?
Zero.
But again, if people out there think it's okay and they don't mind the government interfering because it doesn't interfere with their lives and maybe benefits them, what they don't understand is that once we see that type of power to government, it comes back and it doesn't just stay limited to this one area. If Trump does, for instance, run for a third term, he won't be the only one. What then is to stop? How can you prevent that, right? Trump can run for a third term. Well, so can Obama. I mean, what's the difference? And that's the thing we always have to keep in mind about liberty, is just because it doesn't affect us, immediately, doesn't, and it almost certainly will affect us long term.
Look, I mean, once we ceded the precedent that the government had the right to interfere in trade, it had nowhere to go but up. It can only grow from there, and that premise was seeded, I think, with the formation of the ICC in the late 1800s, and from there it has expanded into the regulatory state and in the welfare state, and it will continue to expand until we say no. This is a moral premise that can never be breached under any circumstances. We go back to the Madison Jeffersonian view of the Constitution that the powers that the federal government have are strictly enumerated powers, and that everything else falls to us.
Just for some quick housekeeping, it's showing me that my connection is unstable. Just so all the viewers know, I have a fix for that. I just didn't have time to get it done today. But tomorrow that will be fixed, and we won't be blinking out as I think we are now. I'm not sure if it's doing it for you or just for me, but nevertheless, it will be fixed for tomorrow.
And I think I'll be able to make tomorrow too. I don't think my plane takes off till
that'll be great.
In the afternoon.
That'll be great. That way I don't have to sit here and run my mouth by myself. That'll be a very, very uncomfortable experience.
You're good at it, though.
I'm good at running my mouth. Thank you. That's nice. Nice thing to say to somebody.
I mean, running your mouth, but saying all kinds of good things.
We've got a little bit more time here. I want to just to ask you. I'm involved with your political party. What made you come up with the idea for the American Capitalist Party?
Seeing the widespread dissatisfaction with the Democrats and the Republicans, and seeing that people were increasingly feeling like they weren't represented by either the left or the right, and that the centrism wasn't the solution, but an actual principled response to the pragmatism of the right and the left was the proper response.
So we have a question here that I think is interesting. The question, it says, "What constitutional amendments would the Capitalist Party consider for pushing?" And it says the questions for future consideration. But I could think of a couple that personally I would favor. I don't know if the party would, but I would definitely favor an amendment separating state from economics.
Absolutely.
I would definitely support an amendment getting the federal government out of education. And
Absolutely.
I would support an amendment that limits the federal government's jurisdiction over immigration to people coming from hostile countries, to people with violent histories, violent criminal records, and for what's the other one, Mark? I can't remember. Infectious diseases.
Communicable diseases.
Yeah, communicable diseases. I would definitely support amendments for those three things personally. I think I could probably convince the other people in the party to go for it because I'm pretty persuasive guy.
But I think anybody who joins the party would want those amendments in place for sure. Now you'd have to convince 75% of the state legislatures to go along with that as well, and that means they'd have to give up a considerable amount of power, and you'd have to convince the Congress as before that they'd have to give up a considerable amount of power because the regulatory state is what enables a congressman who makes $175,000 a year after 10 years to have a net worth of 10 or 12 million dollars. And they don't
We
want
could
to give
also
that up
call
so
for a
easy.
convention, Mark. We could also call for a constitutional convention.
Yes, we could, and I think it should happen. I think these things should happen. Also, we need legal scholars to fix the contradictions and paradoxes in the Constitution that have enabled the state to grow. That necessary and proper clause, and we need to get rid of Hamilton's implied powers concept, and none of all of that stuff just serves to grow the government like a malignant tumor, and stick with the government is a force restraining organization, and first and foremost, it needs to restrain itself to only retaliatory force, and that's how we maintain civilization in our country.
You know, Hamilton is, I think, my least favorite founder. Although I did enjoy going to his grave, it was a nice experience for me before I went to Francis Tavern. But
Is it St. Patrick's? Where is it? It's in New
I don't know
York.
the name of the place.
Downtown.
But you know what was interesting? When I went to his grave, I look over and you see Robert Fulton's grave
Oh yeah,
in
that's
in
right.
the same cemetery. What a nice experience! I was like, oh my goodness. So Hamilton.
Robert Fulton who had a government granted monopoly, by the way, that was busted by Vanderbilt.
All right, there you go. There's this capitalist history.
Yes.
So Hamilton, in the face of the anti-federalists who were arguing for we need a Bill of Rights, Hamilton said, "Why do you need a Bill of Rights to forbid the government from doing what it isn't granted the power to do?" He said in the Federalist Papers, if a power is not enumerated and granted to the federal government, it doesn't have that power. Of course, once the Constitution was adopted and he was in power, he then switched it up and said if the government is not forbidden from doing something, then it has the authority to do so. So it was the old bait and switch, and they went for it. They put forth they adopted the national bank. They established the national bank, and and the government has just continued to grow since then. And that's why it requires people like us and regular, Joes on the street get together, demand liberty, stand for it, and hopefully we can help make that happen, Mark.
That's the idea. That's the idea. The idea is to talk and influence folks to our side, because that's what a free society is. It's about persuasion. It's not about firebombing Teslas because you don't like what Elon Musk is doing.
No.
It's about standing up and persuading people why Elon Musk is wrong, and if you can do that, okay. I will stand up and say why in some respects I think he's right, why in some respects I think he's wrong, what should really be the solution, which goes far beyond Doge, which no political party is willing to touch. And let's see if in the marketplace of ideas, whose ideas win. I'm hoping the more rational one wins. But we are living in a fairly irrational society.
Mark, I'm going to call an audible. I'm going to improvise. I just had an idea, and
Yeah.
I'm going to put it forward for the show. Every day, toward the end of the show, I think we should have a thought for the day. And I'm going to put the pressure on you to come up with this thought for the day on the spot. You're an improv guy, man. I mean, you're an actor. So give us the capitalist thought for the day. What would it be?
The capitalist thought for the day, let's say, is the theme that I think ran through this entire conversation, is that liberty requires vigilance. And so to be vigilant is to be a moral agent for your own life. And that means to take full responsibility and accountability for your own life. It's not a bad thing. It's not something to fear. It's empowering. It builds your self-esteem. It makes you feel good at the end of the day. It makes you regret nothing at the end of your life. So let's push for that full moral agency, full vigilance. Guard your liberty with jealousy, because there are those in the world who want to take it away from you. But your liberty is what enables you to be fully human.
I love that, because recently, and by recent, I don't know, it could be the last 3 weeks, could be the last 6 months. My sense of time is very off, but I've been thinking about this sort of idea about the capitalist citizen and what it requires. And ultimately, what we need to establish a capitalist society is for the individuals to take responsibility for their own lives, to use reason as their guide, to put themselves first and not look to violate the rights of anybody else. If people start to feel like they're capable, if they have that self-esteem that both Rand and Nathaniel Branden talked about, if people have that self-esteem and that belief in themselves, it'd be much easier to establish a free society. So I think your words are very wise, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, you know what? I think people also have to start orienting themselves differently around government. So at the moment, we have two sort of extreme perspectives, which are both wrong. The libertarian perspective is that government is evil and inherently evil. And
see, that's the key that I think we need to address, maybe not too much in depth today, but at some point. It's the idea that the government is necessarily evil.
correct.
And to me, that obviates free will, right?
Absolutely.
Because if people have free will, the government isn't necessarily evil, although the examples we have of government are largely evil.
Right. Now you've said that probably than what I'm about to say. So we have that extreme camp of the libertarians who think the government is inherently evil. And we have the other extreme camp that says the government is a tool for social change and for enforcing equality and for regulating outcomes. None of those are right. If you see government for what it is, a gun. Now, what is a gun? A gun is a dangerous tool, but what it does and how it's used is entirely dependent upon the values of the user. If the gun is used in defense of life, it's a weapon that acts for justice. If it's used to take life or to initiate force against others, it's used for evil. And so people need to understand that we have this innovation called government. A representative republic is a sort of innovation that enables our society to remain organized under a certain umbrella of laws. Government itself, it's not evil, it's dangerous, like electricity is dangerous. And so you need to handle it with in the way that you would handle any dangerous item, with very specific rules that you never break. Electricity is an amazing boon to humankind, like nuclear power is. But if I handle it any old way, it can be a terrible thing for my life and for other people's lives. It can be a tremendously dangerous prospect. But if I tame it and hold it and restrain it and use it only according to the rules that its nature demands, then it becomes an absolute necessity. And us capitalists understand government as an absolute necessity. Libertarians don't think that it's a necessity, but we do. But we understand that necessity of restrained force needs to be restrained itself.
Awesome. I think what you basically said is government can make a great servant, but a very poor master.
Indeed.
All right. Well, take us out, Mark. Wrap us up. And remember to tell them we'll be back tomorrow.
Yes, folks. Well, thank you for listening to and watching episode 2 of The Capitalist Corner. We will be here tomorrow. Michael Liebowitz and I will be here tomorrow talking about current events. We're not sure yet what that's going to be, so you'll be surprised by the content. Make sure you visit Michael Liebowitz, The Rational Legalist. It's a great show, one of the best podcasts, I think, out there. And you can find me on X, Mark R. Pellegrino. It's the check mark. Don't go for anybody else. They're fakes. And if you want to fight, I'm your man. If you want to have a good conversation, I'm also your man. And Michael Liebowitz, yours is Liebowitz out.
Lebo is out. Yes, Lebo is out. Yes.
Lebo is out. He's
out of prison, not the closet.
Out of prison, but also out as a capitalist and out as a
Yes.
freedom fighter and one of the most articulate spokesmen for the freedom movement out there today. So, folks, join us tomorrow. Look forward to you. Same bat time, same bat place. See you tomorrow.
I was thinking the same thing. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.